Allora, buonasera, benvenuti alla Facoltà di Architettura di Roma, della Sapienza. Allora, questa desidero dire che è un'iniziativa che abbiamo costruito insieme all'Accademia Americana di Roma, insieme alla direttrice artistica Ilaria Puri Purini. Quindi sono molto orgoglioso di avervi qui ospiti e condividere questa bella iniziativa, e lascio subito la parola al grande capo, che è il preside della nostra facoltà, che, ci tengo a dire, ha dato un impulso importante. Molte cose stanno cambiando e altre ne cambieranno sicuramente nei prossimi anni. Quindi passo la parola al nostro preside.
Grazie. Proprio due cose molto veloci. Intanto grazie a Luca Ribichini per questa iniziativa. Credo che sia molto importante e auspicabile anche una estensione di questi rapporti, di queste relazioni tra la Facoltà di Architettura e l'Accademia Americana, ma in genere anche le Accademie di Roma, perché noi abbiamo la nostra sede principale in quella che viene chiamata anche la Valle delle Accademie. E di quando in quando, diciamo, abbiamo anche delle iniziative, diciamo, frontali con le diverse accademie a seconda dei temi, che coinvolgono anche la nostra scuola di dottorato, i nostri PhD della scuola di dottorato, che è una delle scuole più grandi, diciamo, a livello europeo, perché riunisce 3 dottorati, uno di architettura e teorie, uno di architettura e costruzione, uno di architettura e paesaggio e ambiente. Sono circa un centinaio di ragazzi e ragazze che ci impegnano molto, perché il nostro dottorato, a differenza di alcuni modelli anglosassoni, è improntato per esempio su una struttura di tipo seminariale e non tutoriale, per cui c'è anche un processo, chiamiamolo così, di addestramento alla ricerca. E veniamo subito, diciamo, all'argomento, perché in realtà noi abbiamo molto riflettuto, perché sono passati, io ho fatto il dottorato in questa università, sono stato acquisito da questa università come dottore di ricerca, ma avevo fatto i miei studi a Venezia, in un periodo molto bello per l'Istituto Universitario di Architettura di Venezia. Io ho avuto professori Aldo Rossi, Carlo Emonino, Vittorio Gregotti. Ho avuto la fortuna anche di seguire i corsi di storia di Manfredo Taffuri, del suo straordinario laboratorio di analisi critica e storica, che insomma marcò negli anni '80 in maniera molto incisiva gli studi sull'architettura. E abbiamo, dicevo, in tutti questi anni riflettuto molto sul rapporto tra ricerca e progetto, perché in realtà per noi il progetto è, con l'accento, ricerca, e la ricerca è, con l'accento, progetto. Quindi non c'è una congiunzione, ma c'è un legame di azione tra le due componenti. E abbiamo da tempo riflettuto anche dentro questo addestramento nei corsi di dottorato, che sono il terzo livello di formazione all'interno di questa facoltà, quale doveva essere il prodotto e quindi in qualche modo gli effetti di questo legame profondo tra la ricerca e il progetto all'interno di una facoltà di architettura. E all'inizio, mi ricordo quando io ero giovane dottorando, addirittura c'era chi teorizzava che i PhD non dovessero fare una ricerca teorica, ma dovessero proprio contribuire con un progetto, con una visione dell'architettura che passava attraverso il disegno e l'esercizio di una sperimentazione compositiva. E c'è chi invece diceva che la componente riflessiva, e quindi la teoria, era assolutamente ineliminabile e che forse il progetto doveva cedere un po' il passo alla struttura intellettuale del pensiero sull'architettura, perché quella poteva assumere caratteri più universali e l'altra era in qualche modo legata alle contingenze, anche se questo poi non è vero, perché ci sono dei progetti teorici dimostrativi che testimoniano di questo legame. Io mi sono fatto 2 appunti prima di venire qui, perché sono stato catapultato dal Senato accademico, però ringrazio Luca Ribichini anche per questa piacevole distrazione. La prima considerazione che mi viene da dire è che noi ci occupiamo di forma, sempre. E conformare, che è una parola interessante in italiano, vuol dire sostanzialmente conferire forma a qualcosa ponendo attenzione agli elementi che entrano in gioco e quindi alle loro reciproche relazioni. Questo è l'essenza della composizione in architettura. Nella costruzione di un luogo l'atto del conformare, cioè dare forma, si traduce generalmente in una cosa che mi piace rievocare, sulla quale insisteva anche Robert Venturi, cioè nel far corrispondere, nel rendere adatto, cioè nell'adattare una forma a un sito, oppure anche un sito a una forma, che certe volte è un passaggio anche migliore. Questa modalità naturalmente richiede una conoscenza importante, intanto una conoscenza topografica del luogo per far emergere dal suo palinsesto le figure, i temi latenti o in atto che possono essere stati già espressi oppure interrotti, oppure che non sono riusciti mai a venire alla luce. Ci sono dei luoghi che non hanno ancora parlato, che sono silenti. Ecco come il progetto di architettura acquisisce valenze conoscitive e direi si traduce in uno strumento ricognitivo e interpretativo formidabile. E attraverso questo approccio possiamo dire che il progetto costituisce una modalità possibile di fare ricerca, il cui risultato, espresso in una forma disegnata o realizzata, si offre come ulteriore materia di indagine. E questo è importante per tenere viva, accesa sempre, come dire, la lampada della teoria o della riflessione sul progetto. All'interno di una scuola di architettura questo è fondamentale. Se noi non potessimo raccontare anche gli effetti che molti dei progetti hanno provocato nella società, nella vita degli individui, noi non avremmo niente da comunicare. Montare questi racconti è complicatissimo, perché è importante quel che si dice prima e quel che si dice dopo. Richiede anche una grande pazienza, perché si tratta di materia molto complessa. Quindi il progetto, io penso che si conferma come una delle più alte forme di conoscenza e quindi strumento di sintesi in cui convergono anche molte esperienze del sapere e del fare. E da questo nascono i nuovi temi, le nuove figure e le nuove prospettive. Tutti, ho finito, i progettisti sanno che Il progetto, per chi lo fa, è importante per due motivi. Il primo è perché rappresenta una tappa importante per poter dire ciò che si sa di quella cosa. Una scuola, una chiesa, un ospedale, un carcere, dove la gente vive, prega, si cura, viene punita, viene educata. E nello stesso tempo il secondo motivo è che il progetto rappresenta sempre, ogni progettista lo sa, l'apertura verso qualcosa che ancora non si conosce. Grazie.
So thank you to the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture at La Sapienza. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Thank you to Luca Ribicchini for having agreed to host this series of talks on architecture. And the Dean put it very beautifully, the importance of project and research, which is the topic of tonight's talk. Just a little introduction on the American Academy for perhaps the students of architecture who haven't been in our building. The building was built at the late 19th century to host artists and architects to come and study Rome. So we kept this mission, and you have some of our artists and architects here in the front rows who spent a year or half a year with us at the Academy. We have about this year 4 to 6 architects, landscape architects and designers. So you're welcome to come and see their projects during Open Studio and to meet us. The Talking Architecture series, this collaboration with La Sapienza, is to bring together two different worlds, the Italian architectural world with the American architectural world. And you were talking about correspondences, and I will add the importance of dialogues and confrontations, and to see how we work differently, how we work commonly. So I will introduce the moderator of tonight, that is Livio Sacchi, who will then introduce Stephen Cassell and Maria Claudia Clemente. Livio Sacchi is an architect and professor of architectural design at the University G. D'Annunzio in Pescara, and member of the teaching staff of the PhD program in Project Cultures, Creativity, Heritage, and the Environment. He has been responsible for architecture at the Institute of the Italian Encyclopedia Treccani. He was a counselor on the National Council of Architects from 2016 to 2021, and the president of the Order of Architects in Rome from 2013 to 2016. He's a member of the CTS, of the Unione Italiana per il Disegno, and president of the Lazio sections for INARC from 23 to 2011. He curated the Italian pavilion of the 26th Venice Architecture Biennale with Franco Purini and the INARC pavilion in 2010. He was awarded the Silver Plaque by the President of the Italian Republic and the Silver and Gold Plaques by the Unione Italiana per il Disegno. His research includes over 450 publications. Among his many books, Il futuro della città, La nave di Teseo, Il mestiere di architetto, and he's currently working on a project for the Italian embassy at Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Livio will moderate the conversation of Stephen and Maria Claudia. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Ilaria Puripurini from the American Academy in Rome, to Luca Ribicchini, and to the Dean Orazio Carpenzano from the School of Architecture of Rome, Sapienza. I'm obviously very glad to be here for this first talk dedicated to the exchange between American and Italian architects. which is a very challenging issue. And I think it's very important for all of us. The specific title of this talk is Research in Architectural Practice. The Dean of the School of Architecture already told us a few words about this important relationship. And tonight we have two very distinguished guests that share a major interest in architectural research and obviously also in architectural practice. The two guests are Claudia Clemente from the very well-known Labix architectural office, which is based here in Rome, and Stephen Cassell, which is principal of ARO Architectural Research Office based in New York City. I met Claudia many years ago, and we kept in touch. And so I saw Claudia's offices growing and designing and building very interesting works. And I recently met Stephen Cassell, actually last week, but I had met his partner a few months ago here in Rome, because his partner sort of preceded him at the academy. And Stephen Cassell has an intimidating number of awards. It seems that there are over 100 design awards, including some quite important awards like the 2020 AIA Architecture Firm Award or the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture. So I think that tonight's meeting is going to be very rewarding for all of us. And I suggest to get started soon, immediately, with our two guests. I don't know who's going to talk first, if Stephen or Maria Claudia. They have something like 20-25 minutes for showing us the researches and the architectural proposals that are going on in their offices. And then we shall save a little time at the end for questions from the audience and answers from our guests. Please, Stephen, Claudia. Stephen. Please, Stephen, go ahead.
Thank you. Let me make sure I press the right buttons. Good. You see green. That's a good sign. First of all, thank you, Dean, and thank you to the school for having me. It's both an honor and a really pleasure, especially to be in such a beautiful room to do that. I think it tops the beauty of rooms I've given lectures in before. And thank you, of course, to the Academy for setting this up, and Ilaria for all the work that she's done on this, and of course for the Academy for having me in Rome, the most important part. So today I wanted to talk a little bit, as everyone said, about research within our practice. My practice is Architecture Research Office. It's our middle name, so I theoretically should be able to talk about this. And it's also known as ARO. I thought I would just first, before I show you some research projects, just talk about the office in general a little bit, since you're not familiar with our work. Let me see if I can get the slides to advance. There we go. So I started the practice with my partner, Adam Urinsky, exactly 30 years ago when I was first out of school. We run it with our partner, Kim Yao. We're a practice of roughly 35 people located in New York City, now located in Brooklyn, actually. And when we set up our practice, one of the things we believe in is we believe in having a radical diversity of project types and project sizes within the office. And we think that for us makes better architecture, and I'll talk about that in a second. So whether it's a house in the mountains or a public project in Brooklyn Bridge Park, a boathouse, or in Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, All these projects share certain things that I'll talk about. We do a lot of work in education for young kids, to architecture students, to community colleges. This is in Tacoma, Washington State. And we also do a lot of interior architecture as well. We've been lucky and very fortunate to have collaborated with the furniture company Nº1 for the last 12 years. We designed their corporate headquarters, showrooms across the United States. Here's a couple of them. In doing that, we've also developed a line of architectural products that they sell through some of their subsidiaries, Spinnyback and Filtzfeld. So it's sort of a new part of our office in the last 10 years of this product design. And then we do a lot of work in the arts, whether this is the Dia Foundation, Soho Galleries and their offices in Manhattan, the restoration of Mark Rothko's The Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas that we finished a couple years ago. And then we're about to start phase 2, which is 3 new buildings that expand the campus because they have a very strong social justice mission. And so these buildings will support that mission. We should start construction in a month or 2. Or again, back in Manhattan, this is Donald Judd, the artist's house that we restored. It's an 1865 building that we took apart basically and put back together again with a modern infrastructure. You know, these type of projects are like a posthumous collaboration. And then we also have collaborations with artists that we do now. This is one of 3 projects we did with the artist Sterling Ruby and also the fashion designer Ralph Simmons for Calvin Klein. Always very fun projects. So as I said, we work on large projects and we work on very small projects, all at the same time. And we feel this diversity in scale allows ideas to cross-pollinate from one side to another, from one typology to another. But what holds it together is a very consistent methodology of how we work and sort of a deep investigation into the social, physical, political context of each project, and then working very hard to understand the sort of mission, vision, goals of those we design for. And then when we work iteratively. We do it, we show it to the people we're designing with, our collaborators, our clients. We do it again, we do it again, and we do it again. And that sort of iterative methodology is what holds this very disparate types of projects together. So I'm going to show you now 3 research projects, each one very different, maybe a different definition of research. The first is very small, and it's research just into a material and form, formal research. And this is, every year, there's a company in New York called Boston Valley Terracotta. They build facades out of terracotta. They invite 4 or 5 architects, really just to play. They'll say, you come up with ideas and we'll build a prototype of that. So we reached out to friends of ours to collaborate, engineers, and we decided to design a brise soleil out of glazed terracotta on a stainless steel tension net. And so we worked just by starting, this was a 6-month project, maybe a year and a half ago, just by playing with forms, just working through ideas, different formal ideas. We set up a couple of criteria for ourselves. We wanted just one piece that's repeated. We sometimes feel that limitations create more invention. So you can just see some of the studies as we're working through this over time. And then we started to hone in on a specific shape that we liked, and we liked what it was doing and how it was reacting. Then we started to refine that subtly and sort of work through it to the final module right here, which is just these 2 V's that lock together. And they lock just by this overlap, for lack of a better word, 2 little feet that keep them from rotating within the stainless steel cable. It seems very simple. It took us a really long time to figure this out, honestly. One of the other criteria for this is we wanted to make sure if we put it on a facade and a piece broke, you could take one piece out without having to take the whole thing apart. So we also tested that to make sure it worked. It did. One of the reasons we chose this shape and this layout is one piece is in front of the other, and so it can cast a shadow on itself. So on one facade, a west facade, you have one orientation, and that orientation can flip depending on what facade it's on, and that can reduce the amount of heat and sunlight hitting the building, which we also modeled using Grasshopper and Ladybug, are the programs we used. It was also modeled structurally to make sure it wouldn't break in wind load. We started to develop details with our partners of how it would go together. You can see up on the upper left-hand corner the mock-up that we were going to build and just exactly how it goes together. Then testing it on a building that's maybe 19 meters by 19 meters by 19 meters, a theoretical building of what happens under high winds, what type of stresses are there, will it perform properly as if it's a real project? And then just dropping it in, honestly, a 3D model that we had from another project, dropping it in there. So parallel to this, we're also working with Boston Valley's fabricators, and they're giving us feedback. And so part of this is what are the glazes? What are the quality that you want within that glaze? That's the beauty of glazed terracotta, is how that gets developed. This was partially during COVID, the first part of it. So this was them FedExing or sending samples to my home and other people's homes, but then it finished in real life. While we were working on it, we realized it reminded us from a project we did that had a diamond espalier that was trained, the trees were trained in a diamond-shaped pattern. And we thought that the green could be like the leaves, and then the brown of the terracotta, the body of the terracotta could be brown, it could be like the stalk. So an abstraction of nature. And that depended on how we fired it in a kiln. It has to be sitting in a saddle to keep it from just falling apart in the kiln. So we chose a face. So one face shows the raw terracotta without glaze. And then they built the pieces for us, fired them, cast them and fired them. We went up to Buffalo, New York, which is right near the Canadian border, way up north, and started to put it together. You can see us doing that now, the team who worked on it, testing it, and then happy at the end before we went out for drinks. And then really just some details of the final piece of the form. You can see the pieces don't touch. You can see the stainless steel. Some of the things that we like as we put this together is forms that change as you move past it, that has very different readings. So there's one of the reasons that we like this direction. We also always think about light and shadow as integral to the design itself and how it casts shadows, how important that is. And then finally outside of the shop where we put it together, we rolled it out as sort of a view of it in nature. So that's the first research project that I'm going to show you. This next one is a very different scale and a very different project. So the last one was about form and material and just honestly playing. And honestly, we're lucky because we love what we do. All of this feels like play. This is a project called New Urban Ground. It was commissioned for a show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York called Rising Currents. And this was in 2010. The previous project was a recent project. They commissioned a bunch of teams, which I'll talk about in a second, but before they commissioned this work, we worked for 2 years as part of a larger team led by a structural engineer, Guy Nordenson, who's a professor at Princeton University. And this was looking at the impact of climate change in the greater New York Harbor. So we were part of that team. Then they used this information to do the exhibition. And what they did, what the curator, Barry Bergdahl, did, is commission 5 teams, multidisciplinary teams of engineers, landscape architects, to look at 5 sites around the greater New York Harbor. And so at the top, on the right is Manhattan, the tip of Manhattan. That was our site, Site 0. And so you can tell this is a very different scale project. We started that project, and this was a While we did 2 years of earlier research, this project was, if I remember correctly, 6 weeks. So it was very intensive, the teams all working together, meeting 3 times a week, all the different teams. So it was a very intense, short period. We started by just looking at the history of Manhattan. So this is the Manhattan 1650 and before, the natural shape of the island, where it had this sort of natural morphology of the landscape, forest, lowlands, and the river basin. By 1850, and I know these time frames in Rome mean they're just small, but by 1850, that edge, first of all, it grew. So Manhattan's constantly been added to over time and has grown, but it starts to have an engineered edge. That sort of nature starts to be separated from the man-made, and it starts to have an oppositional relationship between the water and nature and the infrastructure of the island. It's also when the first sewer systems and water systems start to go in. That extends to its peak in 1960. The island gets larger. This is the sort of the pinnacle of shipping at in Manhattan, where it lined up with the grid. The island has grown a fair amount more at this point. And then by the time we did our project in 2010, it's grown a little bit more, and it's a disconnected morphology of public parks and sort of green space along it, separated from the city. So there's been over time this progressive shift from a natural ecology to sort of a man-made infrastructure. And so the challenges that we were looking at are, first, our design criteria at the time was 2 meters of sea level rise by 2100. I am sad to say we thought that was a really dire prediction. It's actually worse now. That would flood roughly 20% of lower Manhattan. The other problem that we were solving for is hurricanes. And New York doesn't have the really big hurricanes that happen in the south of the country, but a Category 2 storm, which is not a big one, but a okay hurricane, if it's high tide, when the hurricane hits, and it comes from the south up to the tip of the island, there can be what's called storm surge. And that can be at high tide over 7 meters of storm surge. That would flood over 60% of the island. One thing to point out is the shape of the area that's not flooded is very close to the natural edge of what was there originally. So the natural topography is still there, hidden within the streets of New York. There was one other problem that we were interested in looking at. And so New York City has for the United States, an older sewer system that mixes rainwater and sewage from toilets and sinks and all of that. And so when it rains, even as little as a centimeter, the system overflows, and it overflows at these outlets, which are these arrows around. There's roughly 460 of them around New York City. You can see the ones around our site here. And it's not a little bit. On average, every week, I did the math, converting it to liters for you, 1.9 billion gallons of mixture of rainwater and sewage gets dumped into the areas around that. And that is really because the island is solid, rainwater goes off into the system. So what we wanted to do, and we thought the opportunity is to look at this as a larger system about water, both water coming in and water going out. And that maybe in this theoretical project, we could look at this as a way to redefine the relationship of ecology and infrastructure within the city. And so in our project looking forward, we did just that. And what we did is create 2 basic systems, a system of porous streets that would absorb water or channel water off in the event of a storm, and then a graduated edge of wetlands made both freshwater and saltwater wetlands. You can see a section through the Manhattan Island right here, and I'll just talk about it a little bit more here. So typically, this is actually right at the beginning of Broadway, right at the tip of the island, a level 1 street. And we were assuming by this time cars would be mostly gone from lower Manhattan. Maybe wishful thinking, but 2100, please. So the streets are absorptive, allows water to go in. Where there was parking, or some of the parking, there's green space. We did the calculations that we needed 80 acres, which I don't know the calculation into meters, but we needed a certain amount of absorptive area in order to treat the rainwater, and we set that up. The existing city infrastructure would go in waterproof vaults that would protect it from storms, so electrical systems, et cetera. So this is a level 1 street, the absorption. There were level 2 streets that a major storm surge would bring water, if it hit the center of the island, would bring it back off. And so those had larger channels within it. Level 3 streets that ran parallel to the coast would again deal with that larger storm surge in the case of a storm event. And then the edge of Manhattan is redefined by a series of, the edge is raised slightly to deal with the sea level rise. Then it has a series of first freshwater wetlands and then saltwater. The freshwater helps filter the rainwater and purify it through bioremediation if the right plants are chosen. The saltwater wetlands continues that process. And then we were also proposing at the tip a series of barrier islands that would absorb some of the force of that storm surge, some of the energy of that storm surge, which is what wetlands can do. So we did this project. It was in the exhibition. The goal of the exhibition is really to bring this issue to the public's consciousness, right? And to public officials' consciousness. And we're designing 2100. 2 years later, there was Superstorm Sandy. There was 6 meters of storm surge in lower Manhattan. Our project sort of came out and became the poster for this in the New York Times and other newspapers, and the conversation went forward. Museum exhibitions are really good. $1 billion worth of damage from a storm is much better advocate. And it continued the conversation. And then we ended up having conversations, and the other team members as well, and the engineers that we worked with city officials, with city planning, starting to talk through that. And so if you look through the history of this, from 2007 to 2009, the research, that 2-year grant from the Trobe Foundation, then 2010, the exhibit at Museum of Modern Art, 2012, 2 years later, the big storm, 2012, 2013, we did continued work looking at the impact on housing with the New York City Department of City Planning. And then roughly 10 years after the exhibition, the mayor announces $10 billion to address climate change within the harbor. Not, of course, because of us, because of larger actors, but research can become a public vehicle to talk about issues and ideas in the larger sphere, not just among us who are architects here. And my last project I'm going to show is a different type of research. And this is the everyday research that we do on the design of just architectural projects. So this is a real project. It's built. It's an interiors project, but it's a good example, I think, of this. And we see research in our office as a way to be better architects, because we feel that it's our duty to be advocates for our clients through design. That we, you have to bring empathy and understanding, and really to do projects that represent who they are and further their missions beyond who we are, and the goals that we have as architects is really to align and push their goals forward. So this is Congregation Bet Shemat Torah. This is a synagogue. This is the world's largest LGBTQ synagogues. And it's a very interesting congregation. It was located at the base of a 1927 building designed by Cass Gilbert, a very well-known US architect, designed the Supreme Court and the Woolworth building in New York. Very beautiful building. The congregation, the synagogue, didn't have a lot of money, so we spent 10 years on this project. Most of it was trying to find something they could afford, in all seriousness. So we found this space, beautiful storefront, beautiful building, beautiful terracotta work. And most of it, half of it's underground, is below grade. That's why they could afford it. We organized it, and a couple things about the synagogue. So the Rabbi Kleinbaum, who's very well known, she says they are radically traditional. They are reinventing Judaism in light of human sexuality and gender. They're trying to rethink that, but be very traditional at the same time. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for the design of a sacred space for them? We started by interviewing over 100 congregants, religious scholars, because they're very well known. And then we ended up really organizing the synagogue on the front, on the street, which is on the right-hand side here. There is their offices. They're very socially active, not surprisingly. They have a strong social justice mission. The Supreme Court case that made marriage legal, the plaintiff and the lawyer, both are members of this congregation. And we put their offices where they do that work on the street so they can be seen, right? So that activism. But their sanctuary is off the street, is in the back, is on the left-hand side. We wanted that a true sanctuary away from the city. And then downstairs are classrooms and a library that's also a chapel. So you can see the building at night. This is a landmark building, individually landmarked, meaning we can make very few changes on the outside. Those of you from the Academy probably met Georgie Stout of 2x4. We collaborated with Georgie on the graphics here. You know, that large bright sign is exactly the amount back from the glass that you can do it without getting in trouble. And one of the most basic things they wanted is visibility. So they used to be located in a courtyard, up a ramp. They were very hard to find, and that was originally partially on purpose, but that's where they were. So they just having a storefront, not what we designed, just having a presence in the city was so important to them. But also safety was important. The glass has blast-proof film on it because they are a target, given who they are. They also wanted to clearly announce who they are, that we are a LGBTQ synagogue. We placed a plane of lavender glass at that front, and the pride rainbow flags there to clearly announce who they are within that. Going into the sanctuary. So that one of the interesting things about working in New York is you work with constraints. I think you have the same thing here, but very different constraints. Here we have a 6 meter by 6 meter column grid of a 20-story building that we need to fit 300 people in a sanctuary who all can see. So that's just the nature of when you work within these projects. You can see the sanctuary here. Its focus is a wall that's leaning out of concrete, of a ribbed concrete. The seating is a custom designed seating that stacks out of the way so they can have concerts or events or dinners here as well. They're short on space. They could use double the amount of space they had. Everywhere in Manhattan apartments, you do this too. You make everything do 3 things. So that wall, we leaned it back because while the Torah says that it actually has very few prescriptions for what a synagogue needs to be, but you have to have light. You have to have natural light come in. And so we did this by leaning this wall back. And even though it was way down in this narrow alley, before they bought the space, I went out there and we made some models to see if you can get light down there, and you can. So shockingly, the light comes in. So by angling this out, we are bringing the light down into the sanctuary, and you can see that here. One of the things we're trying to do is they have their Friday services in the early evening, and we like this idea of the light changing from daylight to night, and that change in color shows a connection to nature, and it's sort of powerful as they're having their service. The seats are wrapped around, so you're always seeing different members of the congregation, so that you feel like a community there. You can see the column right there, the structural column, and I'll show you that in one sec, but we carved in what is called the eternal flame, the Ner Tamid, which you have to have as well. We carved it into the column. You have to embrace what you have, and called it the tree of life. So you can see that fluted concrete. We fluted it because it allowed for light and shadow. That little bit of change showed a lot of change because of that pattern. But we also designed the pattern with threshold acousticians to make sure it worked well for music, to make sure it worked well for sound. So they tested this. This is 1/3 the actual size, but they tested it because if you didn't make sure it performed properly. You can see the angled wall. One of the other things it does is allow both the spoken voice and music to go up to the mezzanine, to the upper level. The wall itself is concrete and around that thick, around 30 centimeters thick, because that mask gives you very rich sound. And music is so important to who they are as a congregation that it is, and it was designed by acousticians who design concert halls. And it is incredibly beautiful space for music, for sound. It's designed as much for sound as it is for the visual, for the eye. And then the focus is the ark that houses the Torah. Because it was also used for non-religious uses, we wanted to make sure it could close up with an extra layer. So if you're using it for a concert, it feels right to the congregation. So the first layer is wood, steam bent wood. Then that opens up if they're having a service. This next layer is woven gold, silver, and a natural fiber fabric woven by a collective, this artist collective in Bogota, Colombia, who we commissioned for this. One of the things the rabbi said is everything had to look fabulous, so gold was very important. And then behind that, for a service, is the paroquet. It's a curtain that the Torahs are behind. You're not allowed to take photos with it up, which is why you're not seeing that. That we designed also. That is a fabric that is laser cut, 2 layers of fabric, laser cut with a pattern that I'll talk about in 1 second, and then a gold fabric behind that. Again, the fabulous, get that in there. And so what we did is take 2 traditions. They wanted to weave in as many different traditions from Judaism from many different places, because their congregation comes from so many different places, because there's not a lot of LGBT synagogues like this. So we took a pattern from a synagogue from the 1350s in Toledo, Spain, from the frieze, abstracted it, and then also there's a tradition of these very small, intricately cut paper of these patterns that you can see on the lower right-hand side. And so we reinterpreted that as laser cut, sort of the modern traditional sort of opposition between those. And again, another way to bring that in. And then the last couple things bring you downstairs to the chapel, which is also the library. Again, we took that wood and wrapped it around almost like fabric. And then the ark, in this case, which also houses the Torah, comes from a synagogue from the 1920s that they rescued this piece of it. We designed designed with different artists in collaboration, different things. The yarmulkes are on the left, custom furniture that we designed with woodworkers. On the right, there's artists who did casts for mezuzah. It holds a prayer. That's cast from the ghettos in Poland, from the door frames of the ghettos of Poland, to be exact. And then even bringing their history in different ways. This is wallpaper designed by Alexa Mulvihill. It takes their history and also Walt Whitman, American poet, who's important in their prayer book. So we put that in and then put sort of mined their history from photographs within the elevator itself. And then even within the steps in the terrazzo, we dropped in quotes from Walt Whitman. I find letters dropped from God dropped in the street or dropped in the stair in this case. And then finally, I don't show bathrooms in many projects. This one I do show. So this is a non-gendered bathroom. Anyone can use this. It's just one bathroom. At the time, it was not legal to do it in New York. And so people would do it and they would get around the law. And the synagogue said, no, we want to do this legally, and we want the New York City Department of Buildings, a huge bureaucracy, to let us do this. So it took us over 6 months of negotiating with the Department of Buildings. They agreed to let that happen, and I can't speak to bureaucracy in building departments in Rome and in New York to hear in what's highlighted in yellow, in consideration of the proposed synagogue for the LGBTQ community, where the conventional definition of gender is no longer sufficient. To hear that from a building department official is very unusual, shocking actually. So that was an important thing. And then the last thing for this, and then I'll finish up, is some more within that restroom wallpaper with more of their history. Some of it happy and some of it sad. The letter that you see on the right is a letter from someone who is describing that they're sick, and clearly they have AIDS, but it's before AIDS was identified. This is a congregation that lost 40% of their members to the epidemic, so they were, devastated by this. So that history and weaving, I always choke up when I think about that. Weaving, ideas of who they are and their history in as many ways as possible, and sort of the goal of research and engagement to embed meaning into projects is really, to us, the most fundamental part of research in architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Stephen Cassell for this wonderful mix of slides. I especially enjoyed this mix of built buildings, drawings, renderings, 3D models, technical details, geometrical investigations, data, collages, etc. In my opinion, they really gave us a very good idea of how this design research activity goes on in your office. So thank you very much. Now we go to Maria Claudia Clemente. I quickly mentioned her design activity, but I did not mention her research activity. So I inform you that she has been visiting critic at the School of Architecture in Venice. She's been a visiting critic at Cornell University in Rome and in Ithaca, New York. She's a member of the board of the PhD program in Design, Art, and New Technologies at the School of Architecture in Rome. And she's one of the founders of the Master Course in Exhibition and Public Design. A very important piece of information is that on January the 25th at 6:30 p.m. at the Maxi, there will be a presentation of the Architecture of Public Space, which is the new book by Labix, by Claudia's office. So please don't forget to join the presentation and go to the Maxi on January 25. Claudia, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Livio, for this memory. I thank you, everyone here. Thank you, everyone. So to make a long story short, thank you, Ilaria. Thank you, the university that is hosting us. Thank you, Livio. I'm very happy to meet Stefan. So we agreed to show 3 projects each. It was not easy to choose the 3 projects because the research is part of our everyday life. But then I decided to choose 3, also with the help of Stefan. So the first project is really a research project. It happened in the art gallery. Stefania Mischetti, some Roman people might know her, visited our office one day some years ago, and she wanted to do an exhibition of our models, because the way we work is mostly with models. We do models in our office, mostly in our office with hands, because we think that are very important for the comprehension and for the understanding of a lot of things about the project. So we start with very small to very big. So she visited the office and said, I want to do an exhibition with your models. Then, out of a sudden, she called us and said, no, I changed idea. I want you to produce some new models for the exhibition, some new models in abstract, say what. So we had a very hard time to understand what to do, because we wanted not to do just models showing that we are good in doing models, but we wanted to use this occasion to understand something new. So it took a lot of time, we lost a lot of time in doing these models. We had to find a kind of rule to ourselves how to do these models. So this is just an introduction, our first monography is called Structure. So this is a quote from Carl Andre. I'm sure you know who is Carl Andre. That is of course, that is a very important what is structure for us, so you might understand better what the models are. Basically are some structures. So structures installation consists of 50 models. They are an investigation, really an investigation about some topics that are basically part of our way of doing or working, what we are interested in. So there are all a search about investigation about boundaries between some things, some interior and exterior, between dilated space and compressed space, singular object and series, between architecture and landscape. So it was a matrix that we built and it was set up following a very logical process. We were very severe with ourselves to be logic and rigorous. So these are some drawings of the models. We set up three rules. The first rule that the models have to be all the same dimension, of course. So this is the investigation about difference, series, repetition. The second rule, so they are made of a parallelepiped 20 by 10 by 10. So they're like two cubes, one next to the other one. The second rule concerns the choice of three different structural logics. So there are three structures. One is made out of surfaces, one is made of volumes, one is made of frames. So basically they're the three elemental typology of structures: frames, surfaces, and volumes. The third rules cover the internal rules of every single geometry. I'm not gonna tell because it's very long and very complicated. So now you see some of these models. These are made out of paper, cardboard, cartoncino, cardboard, no? These are made of cardboard. We did that in our office. And you can imagine months and months understanding. So we divide in 3 by 20. So understanding, and now we set up some rules about changing these models. So these are made of surfaces. These are made of wood. And these are the drawings of the wood models. And you can see that for us, every single model was a small architecture. So they're not, they all, and you know, I have to tell you that after that we really made a big effort to understand what we're going to do, because we didn't want to be artists. I'm not anything against art, of course, but we are very clear that architects and artists are two different figures. So we wanted to do this exercise as architects. So every single model for us was a small architecture, not a piece of art. And the meaning of the exercise was in the repetition, in the sequence. We could do probably other 10, 12, 15, then at a certain point a gallery calls us, now stop, we have to do the exhibition. So, and for us was very good, because then afterwards, when we did other projects, very often we go back to this exercise because we really experimented some very architectural topic. So I'm not going to explain one by one because there is no sense, of course. And these are the only one that we couldn't do in our office because they're made out of stones, but we did the draft one in stiferite, which is a yellow material that we use like insulation. And we asked help to the fabricator to do this. And then when the exhibition, and we wanted to exhibit this like a small city. So we also had to do the exhibition project, how we show these 50 models. So we decided to design very narrow volumes that are more or less this high. And so you see the small models at high level. So basically you feel yourself in a small city made out of this small architecture. So like a mini model of a city. And this has been really for us a very strange experience, the radical experience of research. And then these models now are in the Maxi collection because they asked us, so there we donated to the Maxi. And they exhibited in the Maxi for an exhibition some few years ago. The second project, so the second project is, we do a lot of competition. I didn't say anything about the office. There are a lot of Romans, I see some friends. Anyway, we are a small office. We are 15, 16. We want to keep it tight. We try to keep it small because scale and size, I think, is a very important component of the research dimension of an office. This is my opinion, of course, our opinion. I work with a partner, it's called Francesco Isidori, and we spent a lot of time in understanding any project. So we do a lot of competition. I know we spoke that is a completely different culture from America. In Europe, there are a lot of competition, and so this is a competition. The following two projects are two competition that we won, and hopefully they're going ahead. The first one is a master plan project. So he said, why master plan is a research project? The site, who is not Roman, is very far away, it's the south part of the city, in a very beautiful area. It's called, not a park, is not the proper word, it's a big natural reserve. It's called Decimo Malafede. These are, the Rome, who is not Roman, as a very important feature that the city incorporates in itself and part of landscape. Sometimes very rough landscape, very natural and rural landscape, like in this case. And so the master plan, the request of the brief was for a master plan of university campus that has a time span of 2045. So we said, what does it mean to do a project now for the 2045? So this is the first question. The second question is, we did it with Topotech 1. There's a landscape office in Berlin. So the answer to this is, we don't have to design the form, we have to design the structure of the master plan. Going back to the idea of structure. The structure of a master plan, so we went back to understanding some examples in which the landscape was structured before being designed, or the design was the structure in itself. So for example, the Centuriazio. Centuriazio is a Roman, old Roman way of organizing the fields. This is the left image. So it was plowed fields. The Romans used to use a lot of geometrical form, like the city, as you know, but also the fields, to organize rapidly and efficiently. Then we were looking at a different way of organizing a nature in Renaissance time, where the geometry was not a way of organizing the fields, but was a way of, let's say, demonstrating the centrality of man. So this is Orti Academici and the centrality of man in Vitruvio Man. And then we had two different points of view. So understanding on one side the geometry of Villa Lante, on the other side the naturality of Agro Romano, which is the typical Roman landscape. How to put together those two elements. So on one side, we wanted to organize this big master plan, finding a rule that was kind of allowing to be flexible in time. And so on one side, the geometry that we love of Villa Lante. What we love Villa Lante? Villa Lante, that I think you might know, is when the geometry of the Renaissance time was ruling not only the buildings, but also the landscape, exactly at the same time with the same logic. On the other side, we had this Agro Romano, where the master plan there was a very beautiful landscape. So natural and artificial system together. So basically we defined a grid. This grid was given by the dimension of the only building that was here. There's a hospital, very important hospital. And this grid was 72 meters by 7.6. And this, I don't know if you see this image. So you see that this green system enters in the master plan and defines, and you see how this is existing building. So this grid, this is one of the possible infinite system of the master plan. So it's kind of a strong form, at the same time it's formless. That's what really fascinating us. So this is why I think we won the competition, because this logic, which is very abstract, at the same time, as I told you, formless, but with a very strong form, was really flexible over time. and also in shape, because you can organize the buildings as you want. Also in time, you can start building a piece of it and it has a shape anyway. So you see, this is some of the flexibility of grid in time, and this is flexibility of grid in space. And also was very important for us, the ground floor drawing, the ground floor plan, even it was just a master plan, because we wanted to, this goes back to the book that Silvia was talking before, we wanted the ground floor to be basically open, porous, public. So we have two rules. One is the grid of the artificial system. One is the landscape that opens the grid, enters in the system. The two systems coexist, and the ground floor was thought as a really ground public space. I'm going to go very fast. So the landscape system was drawn by Topotech. It's important that always there are two systems, the natural system and the grid system. Some divisive features of the landscape, the system of the vegetation. And you see there are always the very ruled path and the very natural path, and some singular elements of the park. And you know, this is the use of the open space, the sport areas, and the sustainability. About architecture, you have to know that now this master plan, we won the competition, and this master plan now is becoming, we just submitted to the city after 3 years or 4 years, is becoming a proposal for the change of the piano regolatore, the general plan. So we just proposed to the city because it's a change of an area, because this area in the general plan of the city was supposed to be residential. And we are proposing to the city to use as a campus, university campus. And it's very important for us also the experience in Cornell, by the way, because in Cornell we experience a campus. So the idea of the green area as the core of a campus, the idea of this public dimension that all the American campuses have, that we are not used to that because it's not an Italian device, to be honest. So our experience in America has been for us also very important. In terms of architecture, we couldn't say we want to draw all the buildings. We are not going to do it. The client will organize other competition. For the client is a very important private client, is a campus biomedical, and they're going to organize different competition for all, because we propose them, we don't want to design boring, poi becomes like Gregotti in Bicocca, a Milano. So they're going to do competition for all the different buildings, but we wanted to give some rules. So the rules were, these are the different topologies. So we also had fun to understand what was the potentiality of the grid, what was possible in simple square to organize a building. So like Durand, you know Durand, the matrix of Durand, we had fun to organize a kind of potential matrix of the potential buildings. We given some rules, so we want porticos all around because we want the building to be porous towards the park. We want more or less to be suspended as much as possible. We have to have some voids inside. So these are, and also we gave them some rules of how to organize the buildings in the grid. What are the possibilities? So it was really kind of intellectual effort to understand the potentiality of a very simple rule, which is the grid. These were the axon. And then we did only the first building, which is this one. It's just finished. So it's not published yet, so we see, I will tell you small things about it. The rules of the buildings, which follows the rule of the master plan and also follows some of the model that you saw in the previous project. So basically it is very porous, it's crossable, and has portico on all the sides, by the way, in the diagonal symmetry. Is a public core, so it's full of voids. It's strange, but it's really, the core is void, and the client has been very, very, in this case, very comprehensive, because we really put strongly the idea that the university building has to have a lot of void inside. Because we are in university, and you know, the experience of the students is not important when we are being students, all of us. I remember mostly when I was out of the class, when I was in the corridor with my colleagues in studying. So the public space, the common space of the university building are more important than the quality of the single class. So the class are simple. And so the shared space are very important. And also flexibility because they wanted to share. So these are the renderings, just few plans. What is important is that this is the auditorium. We want to have this cross porosity so the auditorium goes down, not up, as you see from this section. It's a very, just a quick back to the plan, is a very hybrid building because it's in between a street building and a central core building. So this hybrid building, and this is the first image that we have. It will be published in Casabella in February. Is very experimental. The structure is made off-site and then mounted inside. So it's a kind of prefab building. So it's hybrid also in this way. And this is just finished. And this is the staircase of the hall. So some images. Then the last project is Colosseum Arena Floor. We want this is very experimental, by the way. It's a different experimentation because it's mostly technological. It's very complicated. We want this competition for the new arena floor of the Colosseum because it's a public building. The competition was held by the Minister of Culture. This is the Colosseum as we all know, as it is today. The competition had two different aims, two different main aims. One was to preserve the hypogea, the wall of the hypogea, because they are just been restored and they are under rain, sun, they have to be protected. The second and important aim was to use the Colosseum as it was used before, because the image that we have of the Colosseum is not the image that was the original image, as you all know. So the minister decided to do this competition. We won this competition with a very ambitious project, as I will show you. Very simple, very ambitious. So some criticality of the project I'm not going to tell you. One problem was the level, because the walls at the hypogea are very high, some high, so we had to respect, we had a very, very small space for the structure. We, in some point, 20 centimeters. The second problem is they did want that the project of the arena floor was protecting the hypogea, but at the same time allowing people to see the hypogea. That was a kind of oxymoron, but they wanted not to lose the view of the hypogea, but they want to protect the hypogea, so it was a little complicated. The third problem was the water. Because, as you know, Colosseum is in the convergence, is in between three hills. So all the waters of those three hills, as was in fact Nero, that was very clever at the lake there. That was not just a case. Because all the water of the three hills finish in a Colosseum. And then we had to take care of this problem. In fact, if you go in the apogee, I don't know if you never went to the apogee, it's possible to visit the apogee now. There is a flow of water all around, normally. And then there was Then there was a problem with the structure. We couldn't do, of course, a new foundation. This is obvious. So we could only lay on the existing walls. We couldn't do any structure. We just could lay on the existing walls. And the walls have different foundation, have different period, time frame. So there was also a little complicated. And the last, you have to use materials that was not protected by the humidity. So very, very quickly, what we did want to do was in terms of image, we just wanted to do nothing. We just wanted to do a very simple, this is how it was before the excavation. The Colosseum has been excavated the final excavation was in 1934. So this is how it was before. That was similar, we think, to the original condition. So we did want to do a very simple image. We didn't want to overlay another image on the image of the Colosseum. We just want to do really ground zero, simple. But because we didn't think that we have to affirm our will with a new form in the Colosseum. It doesn't deserve, it doesn't need it. But we, as I will show you shortly, so basically is a floor of wood, made out of wood. The structure, as you will see, is laid on the walls. These are the beams. These are exactly the position of the existing walls, because we had to use that walls, so we couldn't do anything differently. This is a view from inside, and we think it would be very beautiful to sometimes to work there. But so it's simple, but at the same time we wanted to. These are some reconstruction, not very nice, but we found it on the book, of how the Colosseum works. So the Colosseum was basically a scenographical machine, was a machine, because from the hypogea, animals, men, everything was going up with some trapdoors and some elevators. So it was really was a machine. So we won't say, okay, we don't want to add any forms, but we want to keep the concept of the original Colosseum. So we wanted to do a new contemporary machine. It's a stage machine. So the project has some scenarios. So this is the normal, the everyday life. Then there is Flavia period trapdoors. So we can open only the trapdoors of Flavian period. We can open the trapdoors of Severian period. We can open all the central part. Or we can open in that now, this is the competition, then after this scenario, for example, has been removed, we can open only the center part. And how this is possible? It's possible, first, we had to draw the geometry of the Colosseum, which is not very easy because, exactly, we spent 1 month to understand it was an ellipse with 3 focus, 4 focus. So it was not easy, but we had to find out the rules of the Colosseum. So we had to geometrize the Colosseum. The beams, as this is a structure, the beams are, it works, the engineer is very good, is Milan, Buro Milan. The engineers always say this works like a bicycle ruota, because it has circular structure that tight the center one, because the beam are only laid like this on the walls. They're not fixed on the walls. They're just laid. So everything is tight from the structure is all around. These are some elevations. And as you see, some pillars are very small, like this. Some are very high because we don't have the walls. And the reason why the pillars are not just a line, but because we wanted to take, in a way, treat the structure not just a functional elements, but give it a dimension that, in a way, remembers the rhythm of the Colosseum, because the Colosseum has some rhythm, and it remember also like a piece of wall empty. So for us was important to give it a kind of novelty. So material-wise, the pieces that are openable are made out of carbonium and are only 11 centimeters thick. It spans 4 meters. The longer one, it spans 4.5 meters for a weight resistance of 500 kilos. So it's very thin, but we didn't have space. So we had to do something that was very, very resistant in a very low thickness. It was very light because we couldn't load too much weight on the hypogea walls. So it was really a challenge. In this sense, it's a very experimental project. It works with, it rotates and then slides, all of them. You can see probably, this is the beam. The beam is also there's other rules, so not only is a beam, of course a design beam, is not an industrial beam. It also collects water. It also is a kind of infrastructure for the project. And this is how it works from underneath. And now they work. We did the prototype now. It works. So they slide and then, no, they rotate and then they slide. So every panels have 4 engines, 2 used for rotating, 2 are important for sliding. So it's an invention, completely an invention, and we have to thank the engineers because we had the idea, but the architects, but the engineers had to say, okay, very good idea, now we make it work. That was not easy, but the prototype, we just finished the prototype and it works. And so we hope to enter on site soon. This is some technical drawings. And so the project is, in conclusion, is a way of give a new public space to the city, which for us was very important, as it was in the original, by the way, and also to protect one of the most important monuments that we have in Italy. Thank you very much. Half an hour.
Thank you to Claudia for this amazing presentation of these very sophisticated proposals, which I appreciated. We don't have so much time, so I suggest to very quickly go to the questions, if there are any from the audience. I don't know if you need a microphone. Microphones are here.
No, I think we need it.
We'll repeat the question.
No.
Okay. You
Thank you both so much for your amazing projects. The question I want to ask is about conservation. Stephen, you're doing work on New York City, and it seems like a kind of conservation that is an ecological protection, and then for you, that is a conservation based on history. So because this is an exchange, I wonder if you guys could switch. I wonder, what is that? Like, how would you answer a kind of like environmental projection for Italy? And then for Stephen, how would you handle something like New York City that erases its history? So
That's a very good question. I can start.
You want to start? We should say what the question is for people on.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay, please repeat it.
Right. So the question, for those of you far away, is really ideas of conservation, both natural conservation, which I was showing with one of our projects, or historic conservation, and a request for us to flip, turn the tables. So I think Claudia is going to answer first.
Thank you, very clever question. First of all, I want just to say that Colosseum is also, in a way, an ecological projection. I didn't tell all about the water conservation. Anyway, I think that Italy has a lot of problems in terms of protection of the territory, and we should do a lot of things. First of all, protect all the very fragile territory you have inside Italy, which are like for hydrological problems. Time is finished. Hydrological problems. So I think we in Italy, I mean, there are so many things to do. There's a very long list, and we are in delay. So we have a lot of problems every day. When there is rainings, there are frane, so collapsing. So I think that we should do what they're starting to rise now, the consciousness of this problem. But still, there are a lot of things to do. It's a very long list. There is a starting consciousness of the problem, because we had a lot of that person and blah blah. So we should make more, I think. But no one is calling architects to do that. You know, they call engineers because I think it's a technical problem. The politicians. So it's not a technical problem, because the landscape is an architectural problem. So we have to work with engineers. But I think that there is not this consciousness yet. So in Italy, I think the politicians think that is just a technical problem. That is not a problem of preserving also the beauty of the landscape in a way that it works better, and we can do together the beauty of the landscape and a technical problem. So I think we have to work a little more.
And I guess the other part of this is really preservation. Really, the question is, how do we deal with preservation within New York? And a lot of our projects are, but you know, I showed just one image of the project we did for restoring John L. Judd's house, and we're like, oh, that's really old, 1865. And so it's a different meaning because of the just very different time spans that we're dealing with in these two different cities. And so New York unlike Rome, is constantly being rebuilt and taken apart and rebuilt again. I think you actually have to link that back to climate change in an odd way, where adaptive reuse, reusing older structures, is so important just because of the impact of carbon and building new materials, etc. And so while it's a different philosophy, it's so much more complicated in Rome, I'm sure, both bureaucratically, but also technically. But there's so many, conservation in the New York City is 200 years, 300 years, not, where are you conserving to? How many thousands of years are you going back? And then the sheer amount of money that's needed. So it's trying to set up a conceptual framework that makes sense both for conservation, but also for reinvention. And how do you balance those two? Or how do you balance what Donald Judd did to that building in 1968 and 1969 versus what happened when it was built in 1865, when it was a radical all glass building?
Why don't you come closer to the microphone, please?
How are you doing today? Great presentations. Actually, going back to what you started to address and picking up on the idea of that exchange. Given the age of Rome, what would you project as the takeaway from an exchange architecturally, where we're constantly tearing down? We say 100 years, that's old. Rome is like, you're not even a baby, right? What would be that takeaway if we were to say project forward years from now, about what could be learned from Rome in dealing with our historic structures and maintaining the fabric of, say, American cities?
That's a interesting, hard question. There's so many layers to what the takeaway is. The nature of city in the U.S. is this thing that's constantly being reinvented and constantly different, partially because of transportation, constantly because of program. And so I think it is allowing a loose fit for the use of and not saying, oh, I don't need to build a constantly new things, allowing for things not to work exactly perfectly, and maybe that's okay. A room can function as a lecture hall and can function many different ways. So how do you engage with the people you're designing with to say, how can I rethink the need for new architecture? And then when do we need new architecture? When do we need to make those interventions? And I think that's a longer cultural conversation that needs to happen.
I want to add something that is very important, because preservation is not, especially for us that they are Roman, we are obsessed with preservation since we were kind of young. And I want to say something, because I was in Toronto 2 months ago, and it was very funny because walking in the city, I saw a lot of facade, and just 1 meter behind the facade, so the facade were the original facade, and just 1 meter behind the facade, several meter behind there were glass box. So I said, what the hell, what is this? So then I spoke with some colleagues there, and they said that now the city wants to preserve the facade, but then you as an architect, you are allowed to empty the building completely and then build inside the building. It is important that you keep 1 meter the facade. Okay, so if preservation is this, it's bullshit, no? It's bullshit. Because what do you mean? That the history of a building of a city is just the facade? Or is a very, very tricky point, because now in Toronto is incredible. If you go to, there are thousands of buildings. But this is not, so we had to make a discussion all together, Italian, America, Canada, what is preservation? Because if presentation means to preserve only the facade and then you build a glass building behind the facade, so it's stupid, yes. No?
It's a facade-ectomy.
It's a facade, so it's a facade preservation. But what does it mean? The history of a city is just a facade, or is the structure of the city history? So it's a very tricky argument, because now preservation also in America is arriving. We have since we were young, but it's arriving also in America, but then in Canada in this case. But it arrives as the preservation of the facade, but is no. So So I think we can organize a symposium about preservation with Canada, America. No, I think it's a tricky point. It's
is
not a
indeed.
value. It's not a value in itself. It depends.
It is a tricky point, and it requests another evening to debate
No, I
it.
didn't want to resolve the problem now.
We have time for a couple more questions. Please come closer.
I think it's interesting. I'm an American architect and landscape architect, but have lived in Rome for a while. And there's a contrast we draw between, we talk about Italy and Americans talk about preservation, and we talk about the US and we talk about everything being new. And I think that's a false contrast when you look at, especially from my point of view as a landscape architect and urbanist, the physical fabric of the Italian landscape has been transformed enormously in one generation. And so much critical attention goes to the historic centers. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts, both of you, and this is true, we talk about New York, and I was born in New York, and there's so much wonderful fabric, so much layered history. But I think those of us in sort of a privileged critical situations focus on those wonderful places. And I'm wondering how, in general, as the Academy, we can sort of shift and start looking at the places, the periferia of Roma, the suburbs of New York, and how do we give those the attention that we're giving to our special places to start sort of transforming, like using our powers as designers to transform the places where most people actually live.
Thank you. Who's going to answer?
I agree with you, but we cannot decide where to intervene,
I know.
Again, I wake up
Hire
tomorrow
us,
morning
please,
and
yes.
said, okay, tomorrow morning I change the periphery. I would love to. There is the attention of to the periphery is very important. It's very been neglected here in Italy for a long time, and there are no competition, very few interventions. So it's a matter of attention. We think it's more important than working in the city center, but we have to have the occasion to do that. So again, it's not a cultural choice.
It's a larger cultural choice, right? It is saying there is meaning and value, both in natural landscapes and in other areas that are not the traditional centers that you're talking about. And so that's changing a larger conversation. So they do hire us
But
to
also,
do this, right?
if you do there, but also it's not just a matter of architecture, to be honest. It's a matter of the public space. For me, it's more important. I always say that you can have also unnice buildings, but if the ground zero works, if you have space for people, space for shops, everything works, then architecture is important, but it's a little less important. So it's the project of ground zero, which is really important. And in the modern movement, as you know, the buildings have been treated like object in the blanket. So now we have to recover a long time of periphery design following the modern movement attitude, which means that the city doesn't exist, just exist the buildings. And then if just exist the buildings and they're not even so nice, the problem is real big. So the people feels neglected because they don't feel, because the public space, that's the reason why we are so keen about public space, because public space makes people feel part of a community, of a collectivity. Because it's where you share space, you feel part of a shared community. If you don't have a public space that works, then you feel alone.
It's a good push for your book launch.
That's a book of the 25.
Maybe architecture is not such a general issue. Maybe public space is a general issue, and architecture is maybe mostly for architects. This is a possibility. A last question from the audience. Ilaria, no.
One of the Italian architects that are here. Do a question.
I have a very quick question for Stephen. Could you elaborate very quickly on the Rothko Chapel project?
Yes.
Could you anticipate something?
Yeah. So the Rothko Chapel project, which was restoring a 1972 building that Mark Rothko painted 14 monumental panels for. And that project was not a restoration. It was really trying to understand the original intent of Mark Rothko, because that intent was never fully realized. And so trying to understand what the goals were, and some of those were technical, just daylighting and not destroying paintings, but it's, I think, and we do that a lot in our work, and the same thing with the Donald Judd project, trying to understand what were the original goals of that artist and of the patrons, the Dominic Demenil, and then how can we make sure we realize those goals, even if it's a change from some of the things that are there originally. And when do you make those decisions from restoration versus trying to align? And that's a very slow process, working with people who know more about Mark Rothko than we do, or know more about Philip Johnson, who was the original architect on the project. And so, and I think it's probably not unlike projects in Rome. It's not just like, oh, I'm going back to X. It's this slow uncovering of trying to understand where that balance is between restoring something, allowing it to be a new thing to tie into some other questions. And that's the fun and beauty of those projects.
Thanks. Any more questions? Well, probably there would be more questions if we had more time. Unfortunately, time is almost over, and I'd like to give my thanks to the School of Architecture of La Sapienza University here in Rome for hosting us tonight, and to the American Academy in Rome that gave us the possibility of having Stephen Cassell with us in Rome. Hopefully this is the first meeting of a series, so please check the website of the American Academy in Rome in order to follow the future events that will be organizing. And thank you to all of you for sharing this evening with Maria Claudia Clemente and with Stephen Cassell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.